and welcome back to another episode of From the Ground Up on Blackout TV. I'm your host, Christina, and I am so excited to be at Simply Wholesome with Percell Keeling. Percell, thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you, Christina.
So, Simply Wholesome has actually been a staple in the Inglewood community for about 35 years or more, but you also have deep roots in this city. Can you tell us a little bit about growing up in Inglewood?
Yes, it was a very interesting time when I grew up in Inglewood. My family moved to Inglewood in 1963, the day before the assassination of President Kennedy. And I was in the 5th grade. My brother was in the 3rd grade at our elementary school. And it was very interesting times. Growing up in Inglewood, I didn't realize, you're kind of a product of your environment in a subconscious basis. And growing up in a more of a Caucasian environment, you pick up those traits. And I didn't really realize, at least myself, that I was a little different until I went back into the community by my grandparents' house, etc. And the kids that I used to play with say, you talk so much different, you dress different, and it was kind of interesting because I found myself going through a transitional period where I was trying to fit in both worlds. And that became very, very difficult, trying to shift. And as I got older, especially I would say probably when I got into the 10th grade, we had the riots in 1965, and Inglewood went through what I call that white flight. And what had happened is that I woke up one day and all the white kids had disappeared. And then I walked into the quad my sophomore year, and I saw all these black faces, which it wasn't a lot, but it was a lot in comparison to my junior high school and my elementary school.
Percell can be considered an Inglewood historian. Not only has he experienced the assassination of JFK, but he also saw the uprising after the beating of Rodney King. We asked Percell what it was like growing up in Inglewood and experiencing all of this.
Yeah, when we moved to Inglewood in 1963, the day before the assassination of President Kennedy, we were the 3rd black family in the city of Inglewood. The first black family was directly across the street, and the gentleman's, he was in high school. He was about a sophomore at Morningside High School at the time. And there was a young lady that lived right the next block over, but there was one house that separated us if we went over the backyard. And she was the first black female at Morningside. Both of them went through hell. They ran the young lady out of Morningside, and the young man that lived directly in front of me, they shot in his house. They burned the cross in front of his house, and he would always get jumped. And that was very, very interesting because as a young kid looking out the window, my mother would always snatch me and say, get down, because there would always be a bunch of cars coming up to his house and hassling him. I personally didn't have any problems, and I think it's because I was so young. And in elementary school, I remember in the 6th grade, we were painting, and teacher said, it's time to go wash your hands. And we had sinks in the back of the classroom. So I was washing my hands, and one of my white friends said, Percell, your hands are still dirty. And I looked at my hands, and I have, the brown lines in the crease of the hand. So I remember getting a bar of soap, and I'm just scrubbing, because he's showing me his hands that were clean, and being young, you just don't really, at least I didn't really trip like that, because I personally kind of grew up in a bubble. And I'm scrubbing my hands, and I remember it never that dirt, what I thought was dirt, it was never clean. So I remember going home that evening, talking to my mom, and I said, "Mommy, I can't get this dirt out of my hands." That's when she really kind of told me that you were a little different, you know, and yeah, that was interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And
Yeah.
so you ran track.
Yeah, I also ran track at Morningside High School. I did very well. At the time, I was the best in the nation for 3 years. I ran distance. And that was different too because I was African American. I wasn't from Africa or something like that. And I was running cross country and 3 miles, 2 miles, and I was beating all these white guys and they couldn't figure out what was going on, So I got a lot of, I guess you would say, publicity and stuff from that. And I was fortunate enough to go to UCLA on an academic and athletic scholarship. And I ran for UCLA. And after graduating from UCLA, I went back to my junior high school and I taught there for 1 year. And then I went to my high school and I taught track and cross country in my old high school. And that was very, very fulfilling and it was very interesting times because during that time is when Inglewood really started making the transition. That was probably the mid 90s, like 95, 96, and that's just when the Crips and the Bloods were starting to form. So I kind of saw that develop. And from there, I started selling athletic equipment to the high schools and the universities. And I got into that totally by accident. A friend of mine that I used to run with was working for a sports specialty store. And I wanted to get out of teaching. When I came out of college, I wanted to change the world. I had all these ideas. But once I got into teaching, what really changed me was some experience that I had with some of the students, but also I was able to go into the teacher's lounge. And a lot of the teachers were still teaching that was my teachers in high school because I had just graduated 4 years or 5 years prior. And so I would see them in the teacher's lounge talking about the students, which were now primarily black students. And they were just kind of going through the motions because they got a few more years before they retired. They wasn't really trying to help the kids, And I looked at that and I basically said, if I stay in this field, I might end up like them.